Alright, chat. How we feeling? So I think I'm going to start us off with a quick recap. We're starting with chapter 8 today. So previously, we learned that Alex's uncle, Ian Ryder, is Crypt. Hey, welcome in. Thanks for being here. Alex's uncle, Ian Ryder, was a spy who worked for MI6, which is British intelligence. And he was killed when a job went wrong, basically. And MI6 has now recruited Alex, threw him into like a 2-week training course, and then put him in an undercover operation to figure out what's going on with this Egyptian national, technically, but who has lived in Britain his whole life and is a massive businessman who... I'm going to turn this down a little bit in my ears, just because it's a little loud. And this man, Herod Sale, is gifting a bunch of his next-gen, state-of-the-art computers to a bunch of British schools. And MI6 thinks it's kind of fishy, so they sent Alex in after some training to see what's going on. Last week, Alex... Hi, Jen. How are you, friend? Last week, Alex got to Herod Sale's compound. They met, they chatted for a bit, and then he went to bed, and that's basically where we're going to pick up, is him waking up the next morning. And full disclosure, I think there's going to be a lot of Alex and Herod Sale talking to each other, and Herod Sale is supposed to have an Egyptian accent, and I don't know how to do an Egyptian accent. So I just made him sound really slimy and slightly British. Because, again, I'm not good with accents as it is. And it's going to be an experience, but we're going to be okay. I've got water handy, because these reading streams always dry me out. But, really quick, we do have a couple of commands that you can drop in chat. I would appreciate y'all keeping a lookout for people who come in. And might have questions or might not know what's going on. We have a book club command as well as a book command, ! Book, and that will give a little bit of information as to what we're doing. I will, look up and interact with chat every so often, definitely after each chapter. I think we're going to tackle 3. We're going to try for 3 today. And maybe periodically, between chapter endings and stuff, I'll look up, and if y'all are saying something, I'll see what's going on. But I'm trying to keep as much to the reading material as possible so that we can get through this, because I did a thing where I chose a very lengthy series to start off with. I think there are like 9 books in this series, which is why I went from just 1 reading stream a week to 2, is because I'm trying to get through these books so we can do something else. Not that I'm not enjoying them, I absolutely am. However, it is going to be a bit of a long process, and I didn't want to take, a year to read 1 book series. So, I'm going to get to it. Do you have any questions, comments, concerns? Let me know. So I'm going to get started in a minute here. We just take out the sticky note I'm using as a post-it. I mean, the sticky note I'm using as a bookmark is what I meant to say. Clearly, I'm very eloquent today. This should be fun. Let's do it. All right. So we're starting off at chapter 8, which is called Looking for Trouble. I'm excited too. I like this. Alex saw it the moment he opened his eyes. It would have been obvious to anyone who slept in the bed, but of course, nobody had slept there since Ian Ryder had been killed. It was a triangle of white, slipped into a fold in the canopy above the four-poster bed. You had to be lying on your back to see it, like Alex was now. But it was out of his reach. He had to balance a chair on the mattress and then stand on the chair to reach it, wobbling, Almost falling, he finally managed to trap it between his fingers and pull it out. It was a square of paper, folded twice. Someone had drawn on it a strange design which looked like a reference number beneath it. There's a little visual, I don't know if you all can see it, but it's there at the bottom. There it is. The reference number is CL475/19. There wasn't very much of it, but Alex recognized Ian Ryder's handwriting. What did it mean? He pulled on some clothes, went over to the table, and took out a plain sheet of paper. Quickly, he wrote a brief message in block capitals. Found this in Ian Ryder's room. Can you make any sense of it? Then he found his Game Boy, inserted the Nemesis cartridge into the back, turned it on, and passed the screen over the 2 sheets of paper, scanning first his message and then the design. Instantaneously, he knew a machine would have clicked on in Mrs. Jones' office in London, and a copy of the 2 pages would have scrolled out of the back. Maybe she could work it out. She was, after all, meant to work in intelligence. Finally, Alex turned off the machine, then removed the back and hid the folded paper in the battery compartment. The diagram had to be important. Ian Ryder had hidden it. Maybe it was what had cost him his life. There was a knock at the door. Alex went over and opened it. Mr. Grin was standing outside, still wearing his butler costume. "Good morning," Alex said. "Ah!" Mr. Grin gestured, and Alex followed him down the corridor and out of the house. He felt relieved to be out in the air, away from the oppressive artworks. As they passed in front of the fountains, there was a sudden roar, and a propeller-driven cargo plane dipped down over the roof of the house and landed on the runway. "If Gregor," Mr. Grin explained. Just what I thought. Oh yeah, Mr. Grin is Harriet Sale's butler. He used to work as a knife juggler in a circus, so we are told, and he had an accident that cut out his tongue and left his face scarred and messed up, so he has a hard time speaking. Understandably so. I'll continue. They reached the first of the modern buildings, and Mr. Grin pressed his hand against a glass plate next to the door. There was a green glow as his fingertips were red, and a moment later, the door slid silently open. Everything was different on the other side of the door. From the art and elegance of the main house, Alex could have stepped into the next century. A long, white corridor with metallic floors, halogen lights, the unnatural chill of air conditioning. A whole other world. A woman was waiting for him, broad-shouldered and severe. Her blonde hair twisted in the tightest of buns. She had a strangely blank, moon-shaped face, wire-frame spectacles, and no makeup apart from a smear of yellow lipstick. She wore a coat with a name tag pinned at the top pocket. It read, Vol. "You must be Felix," she said. "Or is it now, I understand, Alex?" Oh, wait, hold on. It's going to tell me that her accent is right here. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Fraulein Vol. She had a thick German accent. Okay, now I have to do a German accent. Or try. Try a German accent. Oh, this is going to be bad. Oh, this is going to be so bad, chat. I don't know if I can do this. Oh, God. How German? Hold on. This is going to be bad. I will take him from here. Mr. Grin nodded and left the building. This way. Vol began to walk. We have 4 blocks here. That turned British. Okay. I'm the worst at German accents. They can all be varying degrees of British, just like movies. Okay. Okay, that's fine. I can do that. Maybe. I don't know. We have 4 blocks here. Block A, where we are now, is administration and recreation. Block B is software development. Block C is research and storage. Block D is where the main Stormbreaker assembly line is found. Where's breakfast? Alex asked. Have you not eaten? I will send you a sandwich. Herr Style is very keen for you to begin at once with the experience. She walked like a soldier, straight back, her feet in tight black leather shoes rapping against the floor. Alex followed her through another door and into a bare square room with a chair and a desk, and on the desk, the first Stormbreaker he'd ever seen. It was a beautiful machine. Thank you, Crypt. I appreciate it. iMac might have been the first computer that had a real sense of design, but the Stormbreaker had far surpassed it. It was black, apart from the white lightning bolt down the side, and the screen could have been a porthole into outer space. Alex sat behind the desk and turned it on. The computer booted itself instantly. A second fork of animated lightning sliced across the screen, and there was a swirl of clouds and then the burning red letters SE, the logo of Sale Enterprises. Seconds later, the desktop appeared with icons for math, science, French, every subject, ready for access. Even in those brief seconds, Alex could feel the speed and the power of the computer, and Herod Sale was going to put one in every school in the country. He had to admire the man. It was an incredible gift. I will leave you here, Fraulein Voll said. It is better for you, I think, to explore the Stormbreaker on your own. Tonight you will have dinner with Herr Sale, and you will tell him your feeling. Yeah, I'll tell him my feeling. I will have the sandwich sent in to you, but I must ask that you please not leave the room. There is, you understand, the security. Whatever you say, Mrs. Voll, Alex said. The woman left. Alex opened one of the programs and for the next 3 hours lost himself in the state-of-the-art software of the Stormbreaker. Even when his sandwich arrived, he ignored it, letting it curl on the plate. He would never have said that schoolwork was fun, but he had to admit that the computer made it lively. The history program brought the Battle of Port Stanley to life with music and video clips. How to extract oxygen from water? The science program did it right in front of his eyes. The Stormbreaker even managed to make algebra almost bearable, which was more than Mr. Donovan at Brooklyn had ever done. The next time Alex looked at his watch, it was 1 o'clock. He had been in the room for over 4 hours. He stretched and stood up. Nadia Voll had told him not to leave, but if there were any secrets to be found at Sale Enterprises, he wasn't going to find them here. He walked over to the door and was surprised to find that it opened as he approached. He went out into the corridor. There was nobody in sight. Time to move. Block A was administration and recreation. Alex passed a number of offices, then a blank, white-tiled cafeteria. There were about 40 men and women, all in white coats and identity tags, sitting and talking animatedly over their lunches. He had chosen a good time. Nobody passed him as he continued through a plexiglass walkway into Block B. There were computer screens everywhere, glowing in the cramped offices piled high with papers and printouts. Software development. Through Block C, research, past a library with endless shelves of books and CD-ROMs. Alex ducked behind a shelf as 2 technicians walked past, talking together. He was definitely out of bounds, on his own, snooping around without any idea of what he was looking for. Trouble, probably. What else would there be to find? He walked softly, casually down the corridor, heading for the last block. A murmur of voices reached him, and he quickly stepped into an alcove, squatting behind a drinking fountain as 2 men and 1 woman walked past, all wearing white coats, arguing about web servers. Overhead, he noticed a security camera swiveling towards him. He made himself as small as he could, crouching down behind the fountain. The 3 technicians left the room. and the security camera swung away again as he darted forward, keeping well clear of the wide-angle lens. Had it seen him? Alex couldn't be sure, but he did know one thing. He was running out of time. Maybe the Vole woman would have checked up on him already. Maybe somebody would have brought lunch to an empty room. If he was going to find anything, it would have to be now. He started along the glass passage that joined Block C to Block D. And here at last, there was something different. The corridor was split in half, and a metal staircase leading down into what must have been some sort of basement. And although every building and every door he had seen so far had been labeled, this staircase was blank. The light stopped about halfway down. It was almost as if the stairs were trying not to get themselves noticed. The clang of feet on metal. Alex backtracked to the first door he could find. Fortunately, it opened to a large closet. He hid inside, watching through the crack as Mr. Grin appeared, rising out of the ground like a vampire on a bad day. As the sun hit his dead white face, his scars twitched and he blinked several times before walking off to Block D. What had he been doing? And where did the stairs go? Alex slipped off his shoes and, carrying them in his hand, hurried down. His feet made no sound on the metal steps. It was like stepping into a morgue. The air conditioning was so strong that he could feel it on his forehead and on the palms of his hands, fast freezing his sweat. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and put his shoes back on. He was in another long passageway stretching back under the complex, the way he'd come. It led to a single metal door. There was something very strange. The walls of the passage were unfinished, dark brown rock with streaks of what looked to be zinc or maybe some other metal. The door was also rough, and by the way it was lit by old-fashioned bulbs hanging on wires. It reminded him of something he'd seen very recently, but he couldn't remember what. Somehow, Alex knew that the door at the end of the passage would be locked. It looked as if it had been locked for forever. And like the stairs, it was unlabeled. And somehow, it seemed too small to be important, but Mr. Grin had just come up the stairs. There was only one place he could have come from, and that was the other side of the door. So it had to go somewhere. He reached it and tried the handle. It wouldn't move. He pressed his ear against the metal and listened. Nothing. Unless... was he imagining it? A sort of throbbing. A pump or something like that. Alex would have given anything to see through the metal, and suddenly he realized that he could. The Game Boy was in his pocket, and so were the 4 cartridges. He took one out, called Exosect. X for X-ray, he reminded himself. Now, did it work? How did it work? He flicked it on and held it flat against the door, with the screen facing him. To his amazement, the screen flickered to life, a tiny, almost opaque window through the metal door. Alex was looking into a large room. There was something tall and barrel-shaped right in the middle of it. And there were people. Ghost-like, mere smudges on the computer screen. They were moving back and forth. Some of them were carrying objects, flat and rectangular. Maybe trays of some sort? There seemed to be a desk on one side, piled with apparatus that he couldn't make out. Alex pressed the brightness control, trying to zoom in, but the room was too big. Everything was too far away. But Smithers had also built an audio function into the machine. Alex fumbled in his pocket and took out a set of earphones. Still holding the Game Boy against the door, he pressed the wire into the socket and slipped the earphones over his head. If he couldn't see, at least he might be able to hear. And, sure enough, the voices came through, faint and disconnected, but audible enough through the powerful speaker system built into the machine. In place. We have 24 hours. It's not enough. It's all we have. They come in tonight at 0200. Alex didn't recognize any of the voices. Amplified by the tiny machine, they sounded like a telephone call from abroad over a very bad line. Grin, overseeing delivery. It's still not enough time. And then they were gone. Alex tried to piece together what he had heard. Something was being delivered 2 hours after midnight, and Mr. Grimm was arranging the delivery? But what? And why? He had just turned off the Game Boy and put it back into his pocket when he heard the scrunch of gravel behind him that told him he was no longer alone. He turned around and found himself facing Nadia Vole. Alex realized that she had tried to sneak up on him. She had known that he was down here. "What are you doing, Alex?" she asked. Her voice was poisoned honey. "Nothing," Alex said. "I asked you to stay in your room." "Yes, but I'd been there all day and I needed a break." "And you thought you'd come down here?" "Well, I saw the stairs and I thought they might lead to the toilet." There was a long silence. Behind him, Alex could still hear or feel the throbbing from the secret room. Then the woman nodded as if she had decided to accept his story. "There is nothing down here," she said. "This door leads only to the generator room. Please." She gestured. "I will take you back to the main house, and later you must prepare for dinner with Herr Sale. He wishes to know your first impressions of the Stormbreaker." Alex walked past her and back up the stairs. He was certain of two things. The first was that Nadia Vole was lying. There was no generator room. She was hiding something. From him, and perhaps also from Herr Sale. And she didn't believe him either. One of the cameras must have spotted him, and she had been sent here to find him. So, she knew that he was lying to her, which was not a good start. Alex reached the staircase and climbed up into the light, feeling the woman's eyes like daggers stabbing into his back. That was the end of chapter 8. Okay, how we doing, chat? What did I miss? Oh my goodness! We had a raid and I was reading. Hello! How is everyone? Corvus, how was your stream? I was lurking in it a bit earlier. How was Overwatch? If you're still here, I don't know if you're still here. I hope everyone's well. Let's see. Cat me some slack. Hello. Welcome on in. I hope you're well. Okay. Alright. I'm gonna grab some water and then I'm gonna continue. Y'all should have some water too. Water's good for you. Is the music in the background too loud or is it okay? Let me know if you want me to change anything. Yeah, there's music in the background. Oh, you can't hear it at all? I'll turn it up. Hi, Ever Haunting. Welcome in. Is that better? Can you hear the music now? Nothing. Can't hear it? How about now? Ooh. It's loud in my ears. I don't know why it wouldn't be coming through. It's there now? Okay. It's just a little loud on my end, so I'm gonna take my earbuds out. Alright. So now we've got chapter 9, which is called Night Visitors. Herr Sale was playing snooker when Alex was shown back into the room with the jellyfish. It was hard to say quite where the heavy wooden snooker table had come from, but Alex couldn't avoid the feeling that the little man looked slightly ridiculous, almost lost, at the far end of the green table. Mr. Grin was with him, carrying a footstool, which Herod Sale stood on for each shot. "Ah, good evening, Felix. Or, of course, I mean Alex," Sale exclaimed. "Do you play snooker occasionally? How would you like to play a game against me?" He gestured at the table. "There are only 2 red balls left. Then the colors. I'm sure you know the rules. The black ball is worth 7 points, the pink 6, and so on. But I'm willing to bet that you don't manage to score at all." "How much?" Sale laughed. "I suppose I were to bet you 10 pounds a ball." "As much as that?" Alex looked surprised. "Oh, to a man like myself, 10 pounds is nothing, absolutely nothing. Why, I would be quite happy to bet you 100 pounds a point." "Then why don't you?" The words were softly spoken, but they were still a direct challenge. 100 pounds? Sale glanced thoughtfully at Alex. "But how will you pay me back if you lose?" Alex said nothing, and Sale laughed. "Oh, you can work for me after you leave school," he said. 100 pounds a point, and if you get them in. 100 pounds working for me, if you don't. What do you say?" Alex nodded, feeling suddenly sick. Adding up the balls, he could see that there were 24 points left on the table. 2,400 hours working for Herod Sale. That would take years. "Very well." Sale was still smiling. "I like a gamble. My father was a gambling man." "I thought he was an oral hygienist." "Who told you that?" Silently, Alex cursed himself. Why wasn't he more careful when he was with this man? "I read it in a paper," he said. "My dad got me some stuff to read about you when I won the competition." "Very well, let's get on with it." Sale decided to take the first shot without asking Alex. He hit the cue ball, sending one of the reds straight down the middle pocket. "That's 100 hours you owe me. I think I'll get you started cleaning the toilets." The jellyfish floated past as if watching the game from its tank. Mr. Grin picked up the footstool and moved it around the table. Sale laughed briefly and followed the butler around, already sizing up the next shot. A fairly tricky black into the corner. 7 points if he got it in. 700 more hours of work. "So, what does your father do?" Sale asked. Alex quickly remembered what he had read about Felix Lester's family. "He's an architect," he said. "Oh yes? What's he designed?" The question was casual, but Alex wondered if he was being tested. "He was working on an office in Soho," Alex said. "But before that, he did an art gallery in Aberdeen." "Yes." Herod climbed onto the footstool and aimed. The black ball missed the corner pocket by a fraction of an inch, spinning back into the center. Sale frowned. "Oh, that is your bloody fault," he snapped at Mr. Grin. "What?" "Your shadow was on the Oh, never mind. He turned to Alex. You've been unlucky. None of the balls will go in. You won't make any money this time." Alex pulled a cue out of the rack and glanced at the table. Sale was right. The last red ball was too close to the cushion, but in snooker, there were other ways to win points, as Alex knew only too well. There was a snooker table in the basement of the Chelsea house, and he'd often spent evenings playing against his uncle. This was something he hadn't mentioned to Sale. He aimed carefully at the red, then hit. Perfect. Nowhere near. Sale was back at the table before the balls had even stopped rolling, but he had spoken too soon. He stared as the white ball hit the cushion and rolled behind the pink. He was trapped. Snookered. It was impossible to hit the cue ball now without touching the pink. For about 20 seconds, he measured up the angles, breathing through his nose. "Well, you've had a bit of blitty luck," he said. "You seem to have accidentally snookered me. Now, let me see." He concentrated, then hit the white, trying to curve around it. But once again, he was out by less than half an inch, and there was an audible click as it touched the pink. "Foul shot," Alex said. "You touched the pink, and according to the rules, that's 6 points to me." "What?" "The foul is worth 6 points. I was down 1 point, now I'm up 5. That's £500 you owe me." "Oh, yes. Saliva flecked Sale's lips. He was staring at the table as if he couldn't believe what had happened. His shot hit exposed the red ball, and it was an easy shot from the top corner, and Alex took it without hesitating. "And another 100 makes 600, he said. He moved down the table, brushing past Mr. Grin, and quickly, Alex judged the angles. Yes. He got a perfect kiss on the black, sending it into the corner, with the white spinning back for a good angle on the yellow. 1,300 pounds, plus another 200 when he dropped the yellow immediately afterward. Sale could only watch in disbelief as Alex pocketed the green, the brown, the blue, and the pink in that order, and then, down the full length of the table, the black. "I make that 4,000 pounds exactly," Alex said. He put down the cue. "Thank you very much." Sale's face had gone the color of the last ball. 4,000? I wouldn't have gambled if I'd known you were this bloody good, he said. He went over to the wall and pressed a button. Part of the floor slid back and the entire billiard table disappeared into it, carried down by a hydraulic lift. When the door slid back, there was no sign that it had ever been there. It was a neat trick, the toy of a man with money to burn. But Sale was no longer in the mood for games. He threw his billiard clue over to Mr. Grin, hurling it almost like a javelin. The butler's hand flicked out and caught it. "Let's eat," Sale said. The two of them sat on opposite ends of a long glass table in the next room, while Mr. Grin served smoked salmon and then some sort of stew. Alex drank water. Sale, who had cheered up once again, had an expensive glass of red wine. "You spent some time with the Stormbreaker today?" he asked. "Yes." "And?" "It's great," Alex said, and he meant it. He still found it hard to believe that this ridiculous man could have created something so sleek and powerful. "So, what programs did you use?" "History, science, math. It's hard to believe, but I actually enjoyed them." "Do you have any criticisms?" Alex thought for a moment. "I was surprised it didn't have 3D acceleration. It's not intended for games." "Did you consider a headset and integrated microphone?" "Of course." Sale nodded. "They'll be available as accessories. I'm sorry, you've only come here for such a short time, Alex. Tomorrow, we'll have to get you into the internet. The Stormbreakers are all connected to a master network. That's controlled from here. It means they have 24-hour free access." "That's cool." "Oh, it's more than cool." Sale's eyes were far away, the gray pupils small and dancing. "Tomorrow, we'll start shipping the computers out," he said. "They'll go by train, by plane, by truck, and by boat. It will just take one day for them to reach every point in the country, and the day after that, at 12 o'clock noon exactly, the Prime Minister honors me by pressing the start button that will bring every one of my Stormbreakers online. At that moment, all of the schools will be united. Think of it, Alex. Thousands of school children, hundreds and thousands, sitting in front of the screens, suddenly together. North, south, east, west, one school, one family, and then they will all know me for what I am. He picked up the glass and emptied it. "How is the goat?" he asked. I'm sorry? "The stew, the meat, is goat. It was a recipe of my mother's. She must have been an unusual woman." Herod Sale held out his glass and Mr. Grin refilled it. He was gazing at Alex curiously. "You know," he said, "I have a strange feeling that you and I have met before." "I don't think so. But yes, your face is similar to me. Mr. Grin, what do you think?" The butler stood back with the wine, his dead white head twisted around to look at Alex. "Right," he said. "Yes, of course, you're right." Right?" Alex asked. "Ian Ryder, the security man I mentioned. You look a lot like him. Quite a coincidence, don't you think?" I don't know. I never met him." Alex could feel the danger getting closer. "You told me he left suddenly." "Yes, he was sent here to keep an eye on things, but if you ask me, he was never any bloody good. Spent half his time in the village, in the port, the post office, the library, when he wasn't snooping around here, that is. Of course, that's something else you have in common. I understand Fraulein Vole found you today." Sale's pupils crawled in the front of his eyes, trying to get closer to Alex. "You were off limits." I got a bit lost." Alex shrugged, trying to make light of it. "Well, I hope you don't go wandering around again tonight. Security is very tight at the moment, and as you may have noticed, my men are all armed." "I didn't think that was legal in England." "Oh, we have a special license. At any rate, Alex, I would advise you to go straight to your room after dinner and stay there. I would be inconsolable if you were accidentally shot and killed in the darkness. Although, of course, it would save me £4,000. Actually, I think you've forgotten the check. You'll have it tomorrow. Maybe we can have lunch together. Mr. Grin will be serving up one of my grandmother's recipes. More goat? Dog. Well, you obviously had a family that loved animals. Only the edible ones." Sale smiled. "And now, I must wish you a good night." At 1:30 in the morning, Alex's eyes blinked open and he was instantly awake. He slipped out of bed and dressed quickly in his darkest clothes, then left the room. He was half surprised that the door was open and that the corridor seemed to be unmonitored. But that was, after all, Sale's private house, and any security would have been designed to stop people from coming in, not leaving. Sale had warned him not to leave the house, but the voices behind the metal door had spoken of something arriving at 2 o'clock. Alex had to know what it was. What could be such a big secret that it had to arrive in the middle of the night? He found his way into the kitchen and tiptoed past a stretch of gleaming silver surfaces and an oversized fridge. "Let sleeping dogs lie," he thought to himself, remembering the dinner. There was a side door, fortunately with the key still in the lock. Alex turned it and let himself out. As a last-minute precaution, he locked the door and kept the key. Now, at least, he had a way back in. It was a soft gray night, with a half moon forming a perfect D in the sky. 50 for what? Alex wondered. Danger, discovery, or disaster? Only time would tell. He took 2 steps forward, then froze as a searchlight directed from a tower he hadn't even seen rolled past, inches away. At the same time, he became aware of voices. 2 guards slowly walked around the garden, patrolling the back of the house. They were both armed, and Alex remembered what Sale had said. An accidental shooting would save him 4,000 pounds. And given the importance of Stormbreakers, would anyone care just how accidental the shooting might have been? He waited until the men had gone, then took the opposite direction, running around the side of the house, crouching low under the windows. He reached the corner and looked around. In the distance, the airstrip was lit up, and there were figures, more guards and technicians, everywhere. One man he recognized, walking past the fountain towards a truck. He was tall and gangly, silhouetted against the lights, a black cutout. But Alex would have known Mr. Grin anywhere. They come tonight at 0200. Night visitors, and Mr. Grin was on his way to meet them. The butler had almost reached the truck, and Alex knew that if he waited any longer, it would be too late. Throwing caution to the wind, he left the cover of the house and ran out into the open, trying to stay low and hoping that his dark clothes would keep him invisible. He was only 50 yards from the truck when Mr. Grin suddenly stopped and turned around as if he had sensed that someone was there. There was nowhere for Alex to hide. He did the only thing he could, and he threw himself flat on the ground, burying his face in the grass. He counted slowly to 5, then looked up. Mr. Grin was turning again. A second figure had appeared. Nadia Vole. It seemed she would be driving. She muttered something as she climbed into the front. Mr. Grin grunted and nodded. By the time Mr. Grin had walked around the passenger door, Alex was once again up and running. He reached the back of the truck just as it began to move. It was similar to the trucks that he had seen at the SAS campus. It could have been Army surplus. The back was tall and square, with a tarp hanging loose to conceal whatever might be inside. Alex clambered into the moving tailgate and threw himself in. The truck was empty, and he was only just in time. Even as he hit the floor, one of the cars started up behind him, flooding the back of the truck with its headlights. If he had waited even a few seconds more, he would have surely been seen. In all, the convoy of 5 vehicles left Sale Enterprises. The truck Alex was in was the last but one. I lost my spot. Here we go. In addition to Mr. Grin and Nadia Vole, at least a dozen uniformed guards were making the journey. But where to? Alex didn't dare look out of the back, not with the car right behind him. He felt the truck slow down as they reached the main gate, and then they were out on the main road, driving rapidly uphill, away from the village. I need a water break. Nerdy Wordy, thank you for the lurk. Yes, Crip, they did say that they were going to eat dog. Also, hi Shiny. Welcome on in. Glad you're enjoying it. My throat is yelling at me. Okay. Alex felt the journey without seeing it. He was lying on a wooden floor about 10 feet across, with nothing to hold on to as the truck sped around the hairpin bends. The walls of the truck were steel and windowless. He only knew they had left the main road when suddenly he found himself being bounced up and down, and he was grateful that the truck was now moving more slowly. He sensed that they were going downhill, following a rough track, and now he could hear something, even over the noise of the engine. Waves. They had come down to the sea. The truck stopped. There was the opening and slamming of car doors, the scrunch of boots on rocks, low voices talking. Alex crouched down, afraid that one of the guards would throw back the tarp and discover him. But the voices faded and he found himself alone. Cautiously, he slipped out of the back. He was right. The convoy had parked on a deserted beach. Looking around, he could see a track leading down the road that twisted up and over the hills that surrounded him. Mr. Grin and the others had gathered beside an old stone jetty that stretched out into the black water. He was carrying a flashlight, and Alex saw him swing it in an arc. Growing ever more cautious, he crept forward and found a hiding space behind a clump of boulders. It seemed that they were waiting for a boat. He looked at his watch. It was exactly 2:00. He almost wanted to laugh. Give the men flintlock pistols and horses, and they could have come straight out of a children's book, smuggling on the Cornish coast. Could that be what this was about? Cocaine or marijuana coming in from the continent? Why else would they be here in the middle of the night? The question was answered a few seconds later. Alex stared, unable to quite believe what he was seeing. A submarine. It had emerged It had emerged from the sea with the speed and the impossibility of a huge stage illusion. One moment there was nothing, and then there it was in front of him, plowing through the sea towards the jetty, its engine making no sound, water streaking off its silver casing and churning white beneath it. The submarine had no markings, but Alex knew it wasn't English. The shape of the diving plane slashed horizontally through the conning tower, and the shark's tail rudder at the back was nothing like he had ever seen. He wondered if it was nuclear-powered. A conventional engine would have surely made more noise. And what was it doing here off the coast of Cornwall? Not for the first time, Alex felt very small and very young. Whatever was going on here, he knew was way out of his depth. Everhaunting, thank you for using your points towards that Make Me Play Bloodborne challenge. And Just Nemu, thank you as well. How are we doing on that? I haven't looked at it. Will my computer let me? 83%. There's 9 days left and it's 83% finished. That is great. What's better? Reading? Jenna, thank you for using your points. Alright. I'm going to continue after some water. Thank you, I appreciate that. Okay. And then the tower opened and a man climbed out, stretching himself in the cold morning air. Even without the half moon, Alex would have recognized the sleek dancer's body and the close-cropped hair of the man whose photograph he had seen only a few days before. It was Yasin Grigorovich. Alex stared at him with growing fear. This was the contract killer Mrs. Jones had told him about, the man who had murdered Ian Ryder. He was dressed in gray overalls and sneakers. He was smiling. And he was the last person Alex wanted to meet. At the same time, he forced himself to stay where he was. He had to work this out. Yasin Grigorovich had supposedly met Sale in Cuba. Now here he was in Cornwall. So the two of them were working together. But why? Why would the Stormbreaker project possibly need a man like him? Nadia Vol walked to the end of the jetty, and Yasin climbed down to join her. They spoke for a few minutes, but even assuming they had chosen to speak the English language, there was no chance of their being overheard. Meanwhile, the guards from Sale Enterprises had formed a line stretching back almost to the point where the vehicles were parked. Yasin gave an order, and Alex watched from behind the rocks as a metallic silver box with a vacuum seal appeared, held by unseen hands at the top of the submarine's tower. Yasin himself passed it down to the first of the guards, who passed it back up the line. About 40 more boxes followed, one after the other. It took almost an hour to unload the sub. The men handled the boxes carefully. They obviously didn't want to break whatever was inside. By the end of the hour, they were almost finished. The boxes were being repacked now into the back of the truck that Alex vacated. And that was when it happened. One of the men, standing on the jetty, dropped one of the boxes. He managed to catch it again at the last minute, but even so, it banged down heavily on the stone surface. Everyone stopped. Instantly. It was as if a switch had been thrown, and Alex could almost feel the raw fear in the air. Yasin was the first to recover. He darted forward along the jetty, moving like a cat, his feet making no sound. He reached the box and ran his hands over it, checking the seal. Then he nodded slowly. The metal wasn't even dented. With everyone so still, Alex heard the exchange that followed. "I'm sorry," the guard said. "I won't do it again." "No, you won't," Yasin agreed, and then shot him. The bullet spat out of his hand, red in the darkness. It hit the man in the chest, propelling him backwards in an awkward cartwheel. The man fell into the sea. For a few moments, he looked up at the moon as if trying to admire it one last time. Then, the black water folded over him. It took them another 20 minutes to finish loading the truck. Yasin got into the front seat with Nadia Vol, and this time, Mr. Grin went in one of the other cars. Alex had to time his return carefully. As the truck picked up speed, rumbling down towards the road, he left the cover of the rocks, ran forward, and pulled himself in. There was hardly any room with all the boxes, but he managed to find a hole and squeezed himself into it. He ran a hand over one of the boxes. It was about the size of a toaster oven, unmarked and cold to the touch. Close up, it looked like the sort of thing you might take on a high-tech picnic. He tried to find a way to open it, but it was locked in a way he didn't understand. He looked back out of the truck. The beach and the jetty were already far below them. The submarine was pulling out to sea. One moment, it was there, sleek and silver, gliding through the water. The next, it had sunk below the surface, disappearing as quickly as a bad dream. That's the end of chapter 9. Enjoy your lurk, Everhaunting. Alright. I feel like I missed something. What did I miss? Shiny! This is what I missed. Thank you for gifting a tier 1 sub to Crypt. I appreciate that. Yes, very good, chapter 9. Very good. I'm gonna see if I can get through chapter 10. It's not too long. It's not too long. I think we can make it to chapter 10 before. Alright, but we gotta do it now. Thank you, Shiny. Norbert, can you chill? Norbert. Can you see her? Wigging out? She's wigging out. Hydrate. Thank you for the hydrate. I'll drink some more. Here we go. Alright. Could you chill? Chill. You can't come out when I'm reading because I can't wrangle you and hold the book at the same time. Honey. Honey. Just one more chapter and then you can come out. Okay? One more. She doesn't understand me, but it's fine. It's fun watching her wig out. She's very funny. And sassy. She's so sassy. One more chapter, Norbert. One more. Okay. Chapter 10. Death in the Long Grass. Alex was woken up by an indignant Nadia Vole knocking at his door. Apparently he had overslept. "This morning is your last opportunity to experience the Stormbreaker," she said. "Right," Alex replied. "This afternoon, we will begin to send the computers out to the schools. Herr Sale has suggested that you take the afternoon for leisure. A walk, perhaps, into Port Talon? There's a footpath that goes through the fields and then by the sea. You will do that, yes?" "Yes, I'd like that." "Good. And now I will leave you to put on some clothing. I will come back for you in, 10 Minuten." Alex splashed cold water on his face before getting dressed. It had been 4 o'clock by the time he'd gotten back to his room, and he was still tired. His night expedition hadn't quite been the success he'd hoped. He had seen so much. The submarine, the silver boxes, the death of the guard who dared to drop one, and yet, in the end, he still hadn't learned much of anything. Yasin Grigorovich was working for Herod Sale. That much was certain. But what about the boxes? They could have contained packed lunches for the staff of Sale Enterprises for all he knew. Except that you wouldn't kill a man for dropping a lunchbox. Today was March 31st. As Vol had said, the computers were on their way out. There was only 1 day to go until the ceremony at the Science Museum, but Alex still had nothing to report, and the one piece of information that he had sent, Ian Ryder's diagram, had also drawn a blank. There had been a reply waiting for him on the screen of his Game Boy when he turned it on before going to bed. Unable to recognize diagram or numbers or letters. Possible map reference, but unable to source map. Please transmit further observations. Alex had thought of transmitting the fact that he had actually sighted Yasin Grigorovich, but he decided against it. If Yasin was there, Mrs. Jones had promised to pull him out, and suddenly, Alex wanted to see this through to the end. Something was going on at Sale Enterprises, and he'd never forgive himself if he didn't find out what it was. Nadia Vole came back for him as promised, and he spent the next 3 hours toying with the Stormbreaker. This time, he enjoyed himself less. And, this time, he had noticed that when he went to the door, a guard had been posted on the corridor outside. It seemed that Sale Enterprises wasn't taking any more chances where he was concerned. 1 o'clock arrived, and with it, a sandwich, delivered on a paper plate. 10 minutes later, the guard released him from the room and escorted him as far as the main gate. It was a glorious afternoon, the sun shining as he walked down the road. He took a last look back, and Mr. Grint had just come out of one of the buildings and was standing some distance away, talking on a mobile telephone. There was something unnerving about the sight. Why would he be making a phone call now? And who would possibly understand a word he said? It was only once he'd left the plant that Alex was able to relax, away from the fences, the armed guards, and the strange sense of threat that pervaded Sale Enterprises. It was as if he was breathing fresh air for the first time in days. The Cornish countryside was beautiful, the rolling hills a lush green, dotted with wildflowers. He found the footpath sign and turned off the road. From the lay of the land, and remembering the car journey that had brought him here, he guessed that Port Talon was a couple of miles away, a walk of less than an hour if the route wasn't too hilly. In fact, the path climbed upward quite steeply, almost at once, and suddenly, Alex felt himself perched over a clear blue and sparkling English channel. Following a track that zigzagged precariously. Words. What are words? following a track that zigzagged precariously along the edge of a cliff. To one side of him, the field stretched into the distance with the long grass bending in the breeze. To the other, there was a fall of at least 500 feet to the rocks and the water below. Port Talon itself was at the very end of the cliffs, tucked in against the sea. It was almost too quaint from here, like a model in a black and white Hollywood film. He came to a break in the path, with a second, much rougher track leading away from the sea and out across the fields. His instinct would have told him to go straight ahead, but a footpath sign pointed to the right. There was something strange about the sign. Alex hesitated for a moment, wondering what it was. Then he diminished it. He was walking in the countryside and the sun was shining. What could possibly be wrong? He followed the sign. The path continued rising and falling for about another quarter of a mile, then dipped down into a hollow. Here, the grass was almost as tall as he was, rising up all around him, a shimmering green cage. A bird suddenly erupted in front of him, a ball of brown feathers that spun on itself before taking flight. Something had disturbed it. And that was when Alex heard the sound of an engine getting closer. A tractor? No, it was too high-pitched and definitely moving too fast. Alex knew he was in danger the same way an animal does. There's no need to ask why or how. Danger is simply there. And even as the dark shape appeared, crashing through the grass, he was throwing himself to one side, knowing, too late now, what had been wrong about the second footpath sign. It had been brand new. But the first sign, the one that had led him off the road, had been weather-beaten and old. Somebody had deliberately led him away from the correct path and brought him here, to the killing field. He hit the ground and rolled to one side. The vehicle burst through the grass, its front wheel just inches above his head. Alex caught a glimpse of a squat black thing with 4 fat tires, a cross between a miniature tractor and a motorbike. It was being ridden by a hunched-up figure in gray leather with a helmet and goggles. Then, it was gone, thudding down in the grass on the other side of him and disappearing instantly as if a curtain had been drawn. Alex scrambled to his feet and began to run. He knew what it was now. He'd seen something similar on holiday in the sand dunes of Death Valley, Nevada. A Kawasaki 4x4, powered by a 400cc engine with automatic transmission. A quad bike. It was circling now, preparing to come after him. And it wasn't alone. A drone, then a scream, and then a second bike appeared in front of him, roaring towards him, cutting a path through the grass. Alex hurled himself out of its path, once again crashing to the ground, almost dislocating his shoulder. Wind and engine fumes whipped across his face. He had to find somewhere to hide, but he was in the middle of a field, and there was nowhere apart from the grass itself. Desperately, he fought through it, the blades scratching his face, half blinding him as he tried to find his way back to the main path. He needed to find someone, anyone, whoever had sent these people. And now he remembered Mr. Grin talking on his phone. They couldn't kill him if there were witnesses around. But there was no one, and they were coming for him again. Together this time. Alex could hear the engines whining in unison, climbing up fast behind him. Still running, he glanced over his shoulder and saw them, one on each side, seemingly about to overtake him. It was only the glint of the sun and the sight of the grass slicing itself in half that revealed the horrible truth. The two cyclists had stretched a length of cheese wire between them. Alex threw himself headfirst, flat on his stomach. The cheese wire whipped over him. If he'd been standing up, it probably would have cut him in half. The quad bikes separated, arcing away from each other. At least that meant that they had dropped the wire. Alex had bruised his knee in the last fall, and he knew that it was only a matter of time before they cornered him and finished him off. Half limping, he ran forward, searching for somewhere to hide or something to defend himself with. Apart from the Game Boy and some money, he had nothing in his pockets, not even a penknife. The engines were distant now, but he knew that at any moment they could turn and be closing in on him again. What would the riders have in store for him next time? More cheese wire? Or something worse? It was worse. Much worse. There was the roar of an engine and then a billowing cloud of red fire that exploded over the grass, blazing it to a crisp. Alex felt... Excuse me. Apparently I need water. My throat is yelling at me. Yes, Kaz, that is my bearded dragon. Her name is Norbert. And that band guy, thank you for the follow. I don't know if you're hanging out still, but I appreciate it. Your girl Karma, welcome in. Good to see you. How you doing? My voice is starting to go, which is fine because we only have a couple pages left. All right. Where the hell was I? Yes. One of the riders was carrying a flamethrower. He had just aimed a bolt of fire 20 feet long, meaning to burn Alex alive, and he had almost succeeded. Alex was saved only by the narrow ditch in front of him. He hadn't even seen it until he'd thudded into the ground, into the damp soil, the jet of flame licking the air just above him. It had been close. There was a horrible smell. His own hair. Fire had singed the ends. Choking, his face streaked with dirt and sweat, he clambered out of the ditch and ran blindly forward. He had no idea where he was going anymore. He only knew that in a few seconds, the quad would be back. But he had only taken 10 paces before he realized that he'd reached the edge of the field. There was a warning sign and an electrified fence stretching as far as he could see. But for the buzzing sound that the fence was making, he would have run right into it. The fence was almost invisible, and the quad bikers, moving fast towards him, would be unable to hear the warning sound over their own engines. He stopped and turned around. About 50 yards away from him, the grass was being flattened by the still invisible quad as it made its next charge. But this time, Alex waited. He stood there, balancing on the heels of his feet, like a matador. 20 yards? 10? Now he was staring into the eyes of the rider, saw the man's uneven teeth as he smiled, still gripping the flamethrower. The quad smashed down the last barrier of grass and leapt onto him, except that Alex was no longer there. He had dived to one side and, too late, the driver saw the fence and rocketed on, straight towards it. The man screamed as the wire caught him around the neck, almost garroting him. The bike twisted in midair and then crashed down. The man fell into the grass and lay still. He had torn the fence out of the ground. Alex ran over to the man and examined him. For a moment, he thought it might be Yasin, but it was a younger man, dark-haired, ugly, and Alex had never seen him before. The man was still unconscious, but breathing. The flamethrower lay extinguished to the ground beside him, and behind him he heard the other bike, some distance away, but closing. Whoever these people were, they had tried to run him down, to cut him in half, and to incinerate him. He had to find a way out before they really got serious. Like that wasn't serious, oh my goodness. He ran over to the quad, which had come to rest laying on its side. He heaved it up again, jumped onto the saddle, and kick-started it. Or, he tried to. His foot scrabbled desperately, but couldn't find anything to kick. Alex cursed. He might have seen quad bikes in Nevada, but he hadn't been allowed to ride one. He was too young. And now, how did you get the damn thing started? There was nothing to kick. So there had to be some sort of manual ignition. He twisted the key. Nothing. Then he saw a red button right in the middle. He pressed it and the engine coughed to life. At least there were no gears to worry about. Alex twisted the accelerator and yelled as the machine rocketed away, almost throwing him backwards off the saddle. And now he was whipping through the grass, which had become a green blur, hanging on with all his strength as the quad carried him back towards the footpath. He wasn't sure if he was steering the bike or if the bike was steering him, but all he cared about was that he was still moving. His bones rattled as the quad hit a rut in the track and bounced upwards. For a ghastly second, Alex thought he was going to be hurled off the bike and into space, but somehow he managed to keep his grip, even through the crash of the tires hitting the ground that punched all of his breath out. He cut through another green curtain and savagely pulled on the handlebars, trying to bring the machine under control. He had found the footpath, and also the side of the cliff. That was when the other quad appeared. The second rider must have seen what had happened. He'd reached the footpath and was facing Alex about 200 feet away. Something glinted in his hand, resting on the handlebar. He was carrying a gun. Alex looked away the way he'd come. It was no good. The path was too narrow, and by the time he'd turned the quad around, the man would have reached him. One shot and it would all be over. Could he go back into the grass? No, for the same reason. If he wanted to move fast, he had to move forward, even if that meant heading for a straight-on collision with the other quad. There was no other way. The man gunned his engine and spurted forward. Alex did the same. Now the two of them were racing towards each other down a narrow path with a bank of earth and rock suddenly rising up to form a barrier on one side and the edge of the cliff on the other. There wasn't enough room for them to pass. They could stop or they could crash, but if they were going to stop, they had to do it in the next 10 seconds. The quads were getting closer and closer, moving faster all the time. Far below, the waves glinted silver, glittering against the rocks. The grass, higher now, flashed by. The man fired his gun twice. Alex felt the first bullet slice past his shoulder. The second ricocheted off the side of his bike, almost causing him to lose control. The wind rushed into him, hammering at his chest and face. It was like the old-fashioned game of chicken. One of them had to stop. One of them had to get out of the way. 3, 2, 1. It was the man who finally broke. He was less than 20 feet away, so close that Alex could make out the perspiration on his forehead. If he fired a third shot now, there would be no way for him to miss, but he was traveling too fast. The path was too uneven. He couldn't fire and drive at the same time. Just when it seemed like a crash was inevitable, he twisted his quad and swerved off the path up into the grass. At the same time, he tried to bring the gun around, but he was too late. His quad was slanting, tipping over onto just 2 of its wheels. The man screamed. His quad hit a rock and bounced upwards, landed briefly on the footpath, and then continued over the edge of the cliff. Alex felt the man rush past him, but had seen little more than a blur. Now he shuddered to a halt, and turned around just in time to watch the other quad fly off the cliff and into the air. The man, still screaming, managed to separate himself from the machine on the way down, but the two of them hit the water at the same moment. The quad floated for a few seconds longer than the man. Who had sent him? Was it Nadia Vole who had suggested the walk? But it was Mr. Grin who had actually seen him leave. Mr. Grin had given the order. He was sure of it. Alex took the quad the rest of the way into Port Talon. The sun was still shining as he stepped into the little fishing village, but he couldn't enjoy it. He was angry with himself because he knew he'd made too many mistakes. He should have been dead now. He knew that. Only luck and a low-voltage electric fence had managed to keep him alive. And that's the end of chapter 10. Ooh, that was like the perfect amount of reading without me completely losing, which is good because I have some calls to make this evening. Well, not really this evening, this afternoon. Anywho, how we feeling, chat? Oh, I accidentally changed the song, which I guess is fine. So the next reading stream is going to be Friday night, 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. But like the rest of these, they're going to be VODs up afterwards, so if you can't make it, or if you're doing something else, I totally understand. If you want to stay caught up with the story, you can just watch the VOD. Super easy. Let me see if there's someone we can raid right now. Who's online? Let's see. Okay, I think I know who we're gonna raid. Let me just get this set up real quick. Okay. Karen from Finance, thank you for the follow. Welcome to the Raccoon Den. Fantastic name. I love it. Okay, let me grab Norbert real quick before I send you on the raid. Come here. Come here. You wanna say hi? Say hi? You wanna say hi? Okay, everyone. This is Norbert. This is my honey. She wanted to come out and say hi. So here she is. Alright, let me get this started. We are going to be rating the Bulba Boy. So please feel free to follow through with our raid. I am going to drop something in the chat in case you want to copy and paste this raid message when we go over. Thank you for being here. Again, next reading stream is Friday, 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Same book. We're just going to continue it until it's over. And yeah. Thank you for being here. Don't forget to take care of yourselves. Drink water. It's good for your body. Did I miss anything? I don't think so. I'm going to send you over. Have a good one. Love y'all.